Welcome to tonight's live stream. I am getting ready to get started in a minute. Just need to let everybody else on social media know that the live stream is beginning now. What's going on, G Woodward 78? What's going on, Christopher Clipper, Patrick Anon? All right, I'm going to get started with tonight's live stream. And tonight's live stream, I'm going to try to answer a question I proposed, which is America in a state of decline? And the reason why I asked that question is because when I look at all of the indicators, they run contrary to what people are saying about America. Now, when you look at much of the media these days, they talk about how we have this up economy, how unemployment is at an all time low, and how things are going supposedly so well. However, once you deconstruct a lot of these statistics, you start to see a country that is not really growing economically, but a country that is clearly in a state of decline that nobody really wants to talk about. Because even though we supposedly have the lowest unemployment numbers in over 50 years at supposedly 3.1%, those statistics going on because even though the unemployment rate is at an all-time low, it does not really count all of those people like myself who lost jobs during the Great Recession and never got a job after they stopped counting us on the unemployment roll. So there are over 20 million people like myself who, after their unemployment ran out in 2010, never really got another chance to get back into the economy with another full-time job. So the unemployment statistics, all they're actually counting are the people who currently file for unemployment these days, not all of the people who lost their jobs during the Great Recession. So those people are not being counted. And that's why I look at that indicator of low unemployment and I don't really see this statistic really coming to make sense the way it did back in the 1990s. Because back in the 1990s, when we had low unemployment during the Clinton era, they were looking for practically anyone to fill many of these jobs. And the salaries that they were paying were far higher than what they were paying today. Because according to statistics these days, while there is so-called low unemployment, almost half of the country is currently working in low-wage jobs. So if we have this low unemployment, it would be, and there's a shortage of workers, you would think if there was a demand for workers, there would be an increase in salaries, but we're not seeing any sort of increase in salaries like we did during the 1990s internet boom. Instead, we are seeing people working low wage jobs mostly, and most of those low wage jobs really are not paying people enough to do things like people did back in the 80s and the 1990s, like going out to go buy a home, go out to buy a brand new car, or go out and do things like have enough capital to start their own businesses like they did in the 90s and the early 2000s. We're not seeing people moving upward economically. Instead, we're seeing people stagnate economically. And that's something most of these people don't want to look at when you take a critical deconstruction of the statistics as related to the American economy. So everybody's talking about, oh, how America's economy is doing so well. But when you look at the numbers, you clearly see that America's economy has really fallen from the boom periods of the 1990s. And we see since the 2008 Great Recession, the American economy really has not recovered overall because we're not seeing the people getting jobs that allow them to move forward in a way that allows them to build anything substantive. Because when you have, again, almost half of your workers working low wage jobs, then how can they afford to do things that allow them to build a better quality of life? Because if people were making living wages and had enough money to go out here and save money, then what would happen is you would see more people buying brand new cars. You would see them going out and buying brand new homes. But these days, people are not going out to buy brand new cars and brand new homes. And that's because a good almost half of the country is working low wage jobs. And on top of it, many of these low wage jobs oftentimes are part time jobs. So these part time jobs don't even give you enough hours to even make enough money to even pay a lot of the basic bills, because a lot of these jobs, they max out at about 30 hours or so. And because they max out at 30 hours or so, usually most people have to take a second job. So you have people working two jobs and three jobs. What's going on, Max Panther? Glad to see you here. And what's happening is that you have people who are working anywhere from 60 to 70 hours in a week at two different jobs. And a lot of times they can't really make any progress at anything because a lot of times with these new jobs these days, these new jobs are nowhere near as stable as the jobs our fathers and grandfathers had, where they could work 8 hours a day and 40 hours a week. And they had free time during the week to pursue things like night school to get an advanced degree or trade school to pursue a skilled trade, or they could start their own little side business. People don't have that time because the schedules are just so erratic these days. And a lot of these jobs, your hours one day can be 7 to 3 or 9 to 6 or 10 to 7, and you don't know what hours you're going to get any day in a given week. And because the hours are so erratic, people really cannot start building any sort of momentum to move themselves forward. So, because oftentimes back in the day when people got a job and in the first year, what they would do is they would start laying out their plans for what they want to go out here and pursue as related to building their life. In that first year, you would start by setting up a budget, start saving some money, and then eventually start setting goals like in a year, year and a half, making plans to find an apartment, and then move out of their parents' home. And then maybe a year or two after that, if they have a relationship, what they would do is start making plans to get married. And then after they got married, that couple would start making plans to have children. Unfortunately, most people, ever since I'd say, the 2001 recession, have not been able to lay that type of foundation or make those kind of plans because America's job market has gotten so unstable that most people don't even know if they're going to have a job for back in those days 5 years, or these days most people don't even know if they're going to have a job to 3 years or even 6 months to a year, because thanks to today's unstable economy, you can have a job today, but it can be gone tomorrow. And because our job market is so unstable these days, this is why so many people haven't been able to even get their life started, especially a lot of Gen Xers like myself, a lot of Gen Y people, a lot of millennials and Gen Z. They are stuck in their parents' home, and they are stuck in the home of other friends because they just can't get anything started because they just can't find that stable job that will allow them to start laying that foundation towards building anything constructive. A lot of kids out here, they're not lazy, they're hard workers, but what happens is that the job market just isn't stable enough for them to say, hey, I can come to this company and I can get a good 10, 15 years here, like our fathers and grandfathers used to do. They could say, hey, I could go to this company and I could get 10, 15, 20, 25 years here, and I could start my life. But most people who are my age and a lot of people younger, the Gen Ys, millennials, and Gen Zs, they are looking at the job market and saying, hey, the minute I get one of these jobs in a place like Starbucks or one of these other jobs, I can't really build any momentum because eventually they either start cutting my hours or they start cutting jobs, and then I have to go look for another job. Or you get these gig and commission jobs, which are very spotty and erratic. And when your money isn't really stable like that, what happens is that people really cannot make long-term plans for their future because you need to have stable employment in order to start laying the groundwork for your future, start laying the groundwork for what things you want to do. I mean, I remember when I was working at AmeriCorps for Strive, and I was there for a year. It's what the year came and went. And I hadn't even gotten started on the plans that I wanted to do before the vice president had told me he had no place for me in the organization. And then I had to start all over again. And that's one of the things that is frustrating a lot of younger people these days about America is they go out here and look to get their lives started, but then just as they're starting to get something started, all of a sudden people yank the rug out from under them and they have to start all over again. And that's really what is frustrating a lot of younger people out here. They want to get their lives started. They've come out of school. They're ready to go to work. And people have made them all of these big promises about America and opportunities being all around them, but they're not seeing much opportunity in the job market because I can clearly see how America's job market is in a state of decline. And the reason why I see it in a state of decline is, again, we are supposedly coming out of a recession. And if we're coming out of a recession, why are wages not going up to a point where people are getting salaries that allow them to go out here and do things like buy those homes, excuse me, or go out here and buy those brand new cars? Because that's what people did in the 90s when we got out of a recession. And that's what people did in the early 2000s when we came out of the 2001 recession. People were spending money and they were buying these big ticket items. But if you look at the post 2008 recession, we don't see that many people buying cars like they used to, because General Motors these days and Ford, they're starting to cut their lineups because they say cars aren't selling. And a lot of imports like Honda say that cars aren't selling. And I believe the reason why cars aren't selling here in America is not because people want SUVs. No, they're not selling because we don't have a working class that can afford to buy new cars like they used to. In fact, used car sales are actually going up. And I see a lot of younger people these days. They're looking at older models like the old box Chevys and the G bodies that used to be in my neighborhood when I was a kid. And they're looking for cheaper, older cars that will just get them where they want to go. And they're not thinking about new cars because they just can't afford them. Because when I watch a lot of younger guys' videos and they're talking about cars, they're talking about older cars and they're talking about going to salvage yards and stuff like that. And again, they're doing that because they just don't have the money to go out here and buy brand new stuff, because there's no jobs that are paying people any sort of wages anymore. And a lot of these jobs really are not really growing in a way that's constructive. And I believe that when I look at the state of America, again, I see a state of decline as related to job market. And that state of decline as related to the job market is also trickling down into other aspects of American life, which are also in a state of decline as well. Because these days, as a result of our really stagnant job market, we are also starting to see a decline in birth rates. And birth rates have been declining for over 4 years now. And most people are thinking that it's an aberration. But as I take a critical examination of it, I see it as having a direct connection to our job market here in the United States and the West. And I was watching something on one of the public broadcasting channels here on YouTube talking about Italy, where the birth rates are dropping to all-time lows, in Japan dropping to all-time lows. And they're all saying, the young people are all saying the same thing. They just can't afford to have children. That's why I say America's civilization is in decline, because when you have an economy where almost half of the American workers are working for low wage jobs, and most of those workers are working part-time, then what happens is that people just don't have enough money to go out here and be able to even think about having children, because they just can't take care of themselves. And when you have people who are in an unstable job market and they cannot take care of themselves, they can't think about going out here and doing things like starting a family, because in order to get to that step of starting a family, you have to be able to take care of yourself and take care of your own needs. But a lot of kids out here, they can't take care of themselves and take care of their own needs because these jobs are part-time. These jobs just don't pay enough, and they just cannot get out of their parents' home because of American companies who are just not understanding how to connect the dots of why your economy is stuck in neutral. Most people just can't afford to have children. So this is why one of the reasons why birth rates are declining in this country. And this birth rates declining in the country are also compounded not only by the job market, but they are also compounded by these child support laws, which really do not favor fathers and do not favor the building of families. Because back in the 90s, we had these child support laws that were put in place, and these child support laws really de-incentivize people from starting families, and they de-incentivize middle class men from even thinking about getting married and having families, because these child support laws, what they do is they give women a reason to just go out here and divorce a man for no reason, compounded with the no fault divorce laws. And with the child support laws and the no fault divorce laws and being enacted, what happens is a woman can file a no fault divorce, and then what she can do is then get 80% of that man's paycheck as child support, and that man has no way to feed or take care of himself, all due to these archaic and really dysfunctional child support laws out here. And because of these child support laws, what happens is most men these days just say to themselves, there's no incentive for me to go out here and get married. There's no incentive out here for me to have children. And there's no incentive for me to even think about starting a family. And that's one of the things most people aren't thinking about as related to our population declining, is the fact that we give American middle class men and women any incentive to start any sort of family, because when you have child support laws making it where a man can be punished and no fault divorce laws where a man can literally have his family torn apart, then what incentive does a man have to continue sustaining America and having the children that become the next generation of Americans? So a lot of these policies are really doing damage to America's economy. And again, all of these things are leading to what I call a serious decline of life here in America, because we made a lot of decisions, I believe, in the 1960s. And now, here in 2019, we are starting to feel the impact of a lot of those decisions we made in the 1960s as related to the future of America. Because back then, you had people like the feminists coming around talking about how they wanted to empower women. And that empowering of women really started the decline of America, along with the deindustrialization of America, because those are the two things that did start the decline of America. The deindustrialization, because we sent a lot of our industry overseas, and now those countries like China and India, they are thriving with a middle class. Meanwhile, America continues to struggle, even in the face of a so-called great economy. Because in a so-called great economy in America, these days, the average American just can't even get enough money together to pay their bills. And that's the thing that makes this whole so-called great abundant economy look like it's a mess, because if your average middle class American can't afford to pay their bills and have some money left over and have money saved for an emergency, then our economy is not running the way it's supposed to run. There's still problems with our economy. And again, those problems, I believe, started in the 1960s with deindustrialization, where we started sending our infrastructure overseas, and we started to go and start thinking about other industries. Like during the Clinton era, we started talking about the service sector replacing manufacturing. I remember reading about that in my organizational behavior class in college. And that was one of the big mistakes that was made in the 1990s, was after we moved our industries overseas, we thought that the service sector would replace manufacturing, and to us having this job market where it would be almost all these low-wage jobs. And now, if you adjust it for inflation, because in the book it said most of the jobs would be $4.25 to $7.25 an hour, and these days, if we adjust it for inflation, the money is about the same value. So what we did was we went out here and outsourced all of our jobs and our labor, and we took away the foundation for our middle class here in America. And that's one of the reasons why, coming out of a recession into a so-called boom, most people are still struggling to get by because we have this service sector economy, and the service sector economy really is only designed to supplement a manufacturing economy because you have to have something you're manufacturing, a product tangible, in order to build a country up. If you're not manufacturing anything, then you have no real foundation of things tangible that you can sell to other countries. But we thought that the service sector, which was retail, fast food, hairdressers, all these other businesses, could go out here and replace manufacturing. And that proved to be a grave mistake we made in the 1990s, was believing that your manufacturing could be replaced with the service sector. And I noticed that back when I was in college. I said to myself, the service sector isn't going to work because the service sector, the jobs don't pay that much and the turnover rates are extremely high. And what we're seeing right now is that now that we have a primarily service-based, consumer-based economy, the job market is extremely unstable and these jobs don't last that long. And if we bring in automation, I believe what's going to happen is the service sector is going to lead to the collapse of the overall economy. Because if you don't have workers who are making money, then you're not going to have consumers who can fund a consumer-based economy. So they're sitting there in the corporations thinking, oh, this is going to save us a bunch of money if we automate everything. But what they don't understand is you need human beings to go out here and buy products because your economy is primarily consumer-based and not producer-based. I mean, if you have a producer-based economy, it's one thing, but America has a service and consumer-based economy. And if there are no consumers, there is no customer to buy the product. And this is why I say America's in a state of decline, is because we have people who really at the top don't understand the decisions they are making and how they have an impact on people overall, as related to the job market, as related to building families, and related to just setting a tone and direction for the country. Because they're sitting there, they're trying to push this automation, but what they don't understand is you need customers to buy your product if you hope to do anything. I'm going to leave a link to the Patreon, and if you guys want to donate to the Patreon and help me make more videos and live streams, I really would appreciate it. And if you want to donate to the Cash App, I'm going to leave a link to that as well. And if you want to donate to the Super Chat, you can donate to the Super Chat. And got 71 here. Let's get those likes up to 50 if we can. But I'm going to continue on. But the service sector we have is not an economic foundation for building a strong America. That's why I say America's in decline, because the service sector was originally designed to supplement manufacturing. That was always what the economy was supposed to be about. Manufacturing was supposed to be about creating hard goods and tangible goods and services that can be sold not only in the U.S. to customers, but it can also be sold abroad. But the service sector was designed to supplement it by providing services to different businesses that were doing the manufacturing and also doing it abroad. Unfortunately, what happened was many of these corporations, they started getting greedy and they started to say, we don't want to manufacture here in America in the 60s. We're going to go to these countries like China and Vietnam and all these other countries to manufacture products more cheaper because we don't have to deal with unions or American workers demanding high wages. So we're going to hire these people to make our products. And then what happened is our economy started a slow decline. And this slow decline also coincided with the feminist movement, which really started after World War II with when they found out they could bring women into the workforce. And then the feminist movement came along, and then you had the Rockefellers talking about how they wanted to push the feminist movement to empower women. But it wasn't about giving women power. It was about lowering men's wages by bringing women into the job market. And when they brought women into the job market, what that did was make it where they didn't have to pay men as much as they used to. And because they didn't have to pay men as much as they used to, what happened was we wound up with a job market where people are looking for the cheapest person they can find rather than looking for the most skilled individual. And what's happening now is most of these companies now, they're looking to hire lots of women, and they hire the women primarily because they work cheaper. And because they believe the women work cheaper, they prefer hiring them because they also get to meet their diversity quotas. Because if you hire a woman or a Black or Hispanic woman, you can check off more than one box as related to the EEO, her less by lowering the rates. Hey, Chris. Chris Brown is the creator of Omega Black, the action-packed, fun Black manga, and he's got a Kickstarter going on right now, and for Omega Black. And this book is going to be, I think, over 2,000 pages, and you can put in a pledge for it by clicking the link in the chat. And I really would appreciate if you guys would help Chris out and help him get his Kickstarter funded. Omega Black is great manga, and I really would appreciate if you guys would go out and help him out and get that Kickstarter funded. And over the holiday season, I would appreciate if you guys would pick up some of my SJS Direct publications like John Haynes' Dark Succubus, Isis, All That Glitters, Esteem Goddess of, The Temptation of John Haynes, or The Man Crisis on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle formats. I could really use the sales, and it really would make a great gift for anyone in your family if you picked up some of the SJS Direct publications, and you'd give your kids some great positive Black fantasy if you picked up some of my books. So I've got a lot of great books that would be great gifts, and I urge you to please pick up some of them on Amazon. I left the link in the chat, and it would really be a great help. But they wanted to bring women into the workplace, and they did this because they wanted to get cheaper labor. And again, this had an adverse effect on America's stability because you had women in the workforce. They were depressing the wages, one, and then two, because you had women in the workforce, there were no mothers to take care of children, and you had no mothers to have children. And right now, women, instead of thinking about going out and being a wife these days and starting a family, they are now just thinking about starting a career and going to college and having a career. And that is the primary focus of most women, because your colleges these days are primarily mostly women these days. There's not that many men in college anymore. So most of the colleges are filled with women, and those women are looking to get a college degree and start a career. And then after they start their career, what they're looking to do is move ahead in the workforce. And because they're looking to move ahead in the workforce, this is why the birth rates in America are declining. Because if most of your women are primarily out here working, having careers, then there's no women getting married and having families. And many of these women, they bought into the feminist idea. And notice how the connection gets unstable when I start talking about feminism. What they do is they're looking for a career, and then they think they're going to get this man when they get older. But however, what happens is most women who have a successful marriage and have a successful family, what happens is they do this in their 20s when they are in their supposed primes. So most women used to get married in their 20s, and they would have their children by the time they were 30 or 35. And what would happen is they would have their family established by the time they were 35. And usually, if they had their kids really young, their kids were out the door by the time they were 45 or 50 years old. But the feminists told women they could wait until they got older to have children. And what's happening is most of the women these days are not able to find so-called good men because they waited too long. They hit the supposed wall. by having numerous sexual partners, and now so many women are single. And again, all of this leads to the birth rates declining because women are deciding not to have children in their early years, but they're deciding to go out and have children when they get older. And these days, if women do get married these days, the marriages don't last very long. And what happens is a lot of the women wind up divorcing because we have enabled super hypergamy in women. And because they have super hypergamy enabled in them due to our family court system being biased and our whole divorce system being biased. And this, again, de incentivizes men from thinking about going out here and getting married and starting families. And that all ties into everything as related to birth rates declining. And when you tie it together with the unstable job market, this is a recipe for the decline of America. Because if you don't have Americans working on building America and you don't have Americans working on building families, then what happens is your civilization starts to decline. Because if you don't have men out here working and designing new innovations in business, and you don't have men and women building families through marriage, and you don't have women having and raising children, then your culture is not going to grow. And that's what is happening in here in America. In spite of this so-called great economy, culturally, America is stagnating, and culturally, America is just it's flat. It's just not going anywhere. Directionally, the culture isn't going anywhere because people in Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, and Gen Z, we can't build any traction to move anything forward as related to building the country up because we can't get opportunities to go out here and build anything. Because just as we start to build something, we get the rug yanked out from under us. And your baby boomers, because they got this I've got mine, F you mentality, they're not thinking about the long-term future of the country. But when I look at the long-term future of the country, I see a country that's in a state of decline, and it's in a state of decline that most people don't want to acknowledge. They're just sitting there listening to people like Donald Trump talk about how the country's doing well, and that looks like it is on paper for the short term, but the long term, we're not doing well with the right indicators. I mean, if you have, again, almost half of your workers working low wage jobs, and you have your workers working part-time jobs, then they don't have the economic foundation to build with. And if most of your women are in your workforce, then they are not having the children that will become the future American citizens and move the culture of America forward. So we have indicators that are going in the wrong direction, and all we can think about is the economy is, oh, there's low unemployment, but that's not what we need to really be focused on. We really need to be focused on getting the country's indicators in the right direction on the right indicators. Because when you look at the indicators, again, your workers are not making enough money and their jobs just aren't stable. So how are you going anywhere overall? I mean, people aren't making enough money to but move out of their parents' home. They are not making enough money to think about getting a family, and they're not making enough money to even think about having children. And Spec Streaming came up with a good point. You have this student loan bubble, which I said 10 years ago is going to explode. And almost 10 years later, we have a student loan debt bubble that hangs there. They bought into the rhetoric about college. They took out large amounts of student loans, and now we have an over $1.6 trillion student loan debt bubble that is hampering, again, a lot of people from getting their lives started because we made promises to people. I remember when I was in high school, They used to tell me that you could make $50,000 a year if you got this college degree. I remember even when I went to college, they told me I can make $20,000 if I got a college degree. But whenever I go out into the job market, I don't see that. Instead, what happens is what's happening to a lot of people today is these employers move the goalpost, and then they start talking about experience once you come in there with the degree. Because instead of talking about wanting to hire someone because they have a degree, they start talking all of this experience nonsense, and they use this as an excuse not to hire someone. And they move the goalpost so that they don't have to take accountability for the claims that were made. And that's another thing that frustrates a lot of young people who are coming out of college these days, is that they were told and promised that there were these jobs out here, and then they come out here, go to the job market, go out and look for interviews like I did back in 94, and all of a sudden we go from, I graduated in 94, Christopher Clipper, with a degree in business, but still you get this goalpost moved on you. And what they do is start talking about, oh, you don't have any experience, or you don't have any experience with the right company, or you have a degree from such and such school and not a university. And but people believed what you told them, and you told them that you would get this opportunity, but then when you come up and finish what you were supposed to do, then they want to move the goalposts. And that's one of the other frustrating things a lot of people have had with a lot of the baby boomers, is that whenever you accomplish something, they move the goalpost. And again, that moving of the goalpost is further driving the civilization into decline, because these people aren't thinking about the future. All they're thinking about is protecting what is theirs with this I've got mine FU mentality. And that I got mine FU mentality is also part of why the America is starting to decline, because these people see themselves as them having theirs, and they're not thinking about the future. All they're thinking is, I've got my job, I've got my pension, I've got my retirement. And they're not understanding that we need workers in the future to be able to pay for all of those things. Because if we don't have people from Gen X, people from the Gen Y, millennials, and Generation Z paying taxes, then who's going to pay for the baby boomers' so-called retirement that they believe is guaranteed? They're thinking, oh, I've got all this stuff, not understanding that all of the foundations for everything that they are counting on is going to be paid for by all of these young people out here. And if they can't get work and they can't get into the business world to start paying bills, then our country is going to really start to go really downhill. Because if there are no replacement population and the younger people can't go out here and work, then you're not going to be able to have that pension. You're not going to be able to have that Social Security. You're not going to be able to have that mutual fund. All that stuff is going to go by the wayside, because you are not thinking about the future and thinking about helping the next generation be able to move forward and move themselves up. Because a lot of the Gen Xers like myself, a lot of us should have been in middle management by now, or senior management, but because a lot of the boomers and a lot of the older people don't want to let go of the power out here, a lot of people can't come up and take those positions and build anything. And a lot of people, they were held back by the 2001 recession, the 2008 recession, and our economy. Yes, we have a booming economy with plenty of low-wage jobs, but we don't have people having enough money to go out here and be able to go out and start their lives. In fact, a lot of people's lives are in neutral, and that's keeping the economy really in a neutral state. Because if we look at America, everything is really in neutral, and that neutral is what's leading to the decline. Because you have people who they can't really get anything started, because nothing is really stable. If people can get some stability, then they can really start making plans for the future. But it's hard to make plans when you have things like student loan debt hanging over your head and you just can't get that full time job to pay it off, or you just can't get, if you come out of any other type of institution, what happens is you can't get that job because once you get the training, all of a sudden, here comes people moving that goalpost once again. So Americans don't really see how they're doing things to undermine the overall growth of America. And they're thinking about having their little spot. And that little spot is that they're thinking about that is going to be here forever. They don't understand that that spot can be lost because you're not looking out, for that next man. And that's something people used to do in the 40s and the 50s was they sat there and they said, we have to look out for the next man. We have to make sure that things are ready for the next man. But in the baby boomer period and part of the Gen X period, people weren't thinking about the next man. All they were thinking about were themselves. But you have to think about the next man coming into a business, because the next man coming into the business is the one who's going to be able to get the work. And if they can stay on the job, they're going to be the one paying the Social Security taxes and the other taxes that allow people to be able to pay for pensions, because those pensions and stuff, all those things come out of your union dues and all of your paychecks on many of these jobs. And if there is no replacement person, there is nobody to pay for this stuff. So you have also that going on in a lot of these union jobs, where you get a lot of these people who get these union jobs and they're not thinking about the future either. Like when I was working at CUNY, they weren't thinking about the future. All they was thinking about is protecting their spot. And when you do that, again, you're not thinking about, hey, somebody who's going to pay for your pension if there's nobody working here? Who's going to pay for your retirement if nobody's working here? Because a lot of these people, what they do is once somebody leaves the job, they want to close the job out, or they want to put nepotism in place. And again, that keeps people from being able to pay for the next man. And when you retire, there's nobody there to take care of the next person. And that's something people aren't really thinking about overall. All they're thinking, again, is I got mine, F you. And now that I've got my retirement, my home, and all this other stuff, nobody else needs to care about anybody else. But we're seeing that this kind of stuff is really leading to the decline of America, because, again, if we have almost half the country in low-wage jobs, then who has the money to go out here and be able to buy things like that home that many of these old people have and replace the older people? Who has the money to buy brand new cars and be able to go out here and drive to and from work? Who has the money to go out here and have children that go to public schools, which are paid for by tax dollars? Who has the money to go out here and pay taxes and be able to fund municipal services? So people aren't connecting dots on how an economic system is supposed to work. And that's another big problem that's leading to the decline of America, is that people aren't connecting the dots and seeing that all of us are connected in America's economic system. Instead, we have this disconnect between different groups. And because we have this disconnect, people are just thinking about their part of the world, not seeing how their part connects to the other. And I believe that also ties into the growing homeless crisis, because we have all of these speculators in the real estate market, and these speculators, they're thinking that these homes are worth all of this money, but they're not worth all of that money. And they're hoarding all of these homes thinking that they're worth all this money, but they're not worth all of that at all. So you have a lot of people thinking that, oh, this real estate is worth so much. But when you do the math, like I have, and I said, there aren't that many millionaires in the world. So why are there so many $1 million homes? And if, again, you have almost half of your country working minimum wage jobs and they're part-time jobs, then how do they have enough money to afford all of these $1 million homes and these $70,000 SUVs? So somebody's not really connecting dots at the top as related to the economy. So I look at that and I say to myself that, it just doesn't add up, because if you have people working for $10, $12, $13 an hour, then how do they buy a $70,000 car? How do they buy a $300 to over $2 million home? And the answer is no one can buy that, because it's just mathematically impossible. It's just mathematically impossible for people to even think about buying those things, especially when you consider many of these part-time jobs not being able to be stable. And with these part-time jobs not being stable, what happens is that you don't have people out here being able to pay for anything or even think about buying anything. And this is just what's happening to our economy. And again, nobody's really looking at the big picture. And all they do on the media is talk about, how the economy recovered as related to anything overall. So there's not any sort of real recovery. And now we're starting to see the big states like New York and California, they're starting to have deficits these days, and their quality of life is starting to drop. And I remember reading one article that, again, I laughed at, where you had this assembly speaker talking about how he wanted to raise taxes. And I looked at that and I said to myself, I remember when people proposed this back in the late 70s and the 90s. And I said to myself, this guy doesn't even see how history is repeating itself, because when you start talking about raising taxes, what happens is you start to lose your tax base, because those who do have money, what they do is they start moving out of the state. And then what happens is your tax base starts to erode. And then once your tax base starts to erode, then it becomes a vicious cycle of trying to raise taxes to pay for spending programs for the remaining poor people there. And this continues to drive up deficits year after year, because this is what led to the fiscal crisis in New York City in the 1970s. And sadly, many of the people in New York State, as related to the legislator, don't see how they're right in the same vicious cycle. And the same thing is happening in California. The same thing is happening in Chicago right now. They just aren't looking at history and seeing how history is repeating itself, and how they are driving their states into decline by going out here and talking about raising taxes to spend for social programs like these. Like here in New York, you're talking about the Medicaid program being out of control. But the main reason why the Medicare program spending is out of control is due to the mandates created by the Affordable Care Act. And a lot of people don't see the damage that the Affordable Care Act did here across the country, because the Affordable Care Act is one of the things that is really hampering economic growth, because the Affordable Care Act mandated that all employees who work full time had to have health care, but a lot of small businesses just could not afford to be able to pay for new workers to work full time, because they had to get health care for them. So they wound up cutting people's hours to part time. And that's really depressed wages, and it has stagnated the job market. And it has stagnated the job market because a lot of these people, they cannot grow in the jobs because you don't have enough hours. And when you're working part time, your job oftentimes can come and go based on how business goes. And in addition to the overall thing with the Affordable Care Act, we have a lot more women in the job market. And what people aren't seeing with a lot of the women in the job market is they are not lasting long on the job. Because I had a family member who worked in public schools, and she would tell me that there would be new teachers almost every year. Now, these women would go out here and get these master's degrees, and within a year, they would quit, and some of them after 5 years would be out of the whole field altogether. However, what happens in this case, which is also leading to America's decline, is you have all of these women who get these degrees in all of these different fields, but when it comes down to their career, they never really grow. A lot of them die, their careers die within a year once they find out how hard the work is. They quit within a year, and then all of a sudden, you have this woman who has never really developed her skills, and then you have women who just after 4 or 5 years never really grow to any level, because once they run into a serious challenge, what happens is they wind up not being able to overcome that challenge and move to the next level. What's going on, Mr. 08? Glad to see you here. And what happens is they don't really grow the way a man does, because a lot of times when a man runs into an obstacle in the job, because that job is his way of primarily surviving in the world, he grits his teeth and pushes on, because without that job, he's going to be out in the streets. So he has to take that job, and he has to make it work. So that's how men grow and develop their skills, and that's how they move themselves forward. But when you have a large group of so-called empowered women in the job market, what happens is those women wind up falling apart after a year or 5 years, and they never really advance to the next level, and they never really take their skills to the next level. And because they don't take their skills to the next level, that's why we don't see much innovation these days. That's why we don't see much creation these days, because women primarily, after they get their degree and they get that job, they come in for a year, year and a half, then they find out the work is really hard, and then they wind up quitting the job, because I saw that in nonprofit too. And they find out how hard it is, and then they walk out, and then your company just doesn't grow. And this is why a lot of American companies are struggling these days, because we have a lot of women in the workforce. They're empowered. They're not natural builders, one, and two, they don't have the discipline or resolve to go out here. I'm good, Luciano. Glad to see you here at the stream. But I'm answering the question, is America in a state of decline? And from all the indicators I look at, all the indicators point to a state of decline. And one of those indicators that leading to the decline, again, is the empowerment of women, because, again, women, they come into the job market with education and degrees and all of this stuff on paper, but they just don't have that discipline and that resolve that a man does. And they have no incentive to get that discipline or resolve, primarily because they know that there will be a man there to take care of them. So if they get a master's degree and quit a job, what happens is they know they can find a guy out here to marry them or live with, and he will cover her bills, or she can find a series of men to cover her bills. And because she knows she can get that series of men to cover her bills, what will happen is she just will walk away from a college degree that has a $90,000 or $100,000 in debt. And that also leads to part of the student loan crisis. So that's one of the things that that's one of the reasons why a lot of women quit their jobs, because I've seen it. Again, my family members would tell me about women, they get a job and then they're gone in a year. Whereas a guy, he's going to stay there for 3, 4, 5 years, because he wants to, one, get these skills. And the reason why he wants to get those skills is because he knows that if he doesn't have this job, he's not going to eat. And if he doesn't have this job, he's going to be on the street. So this job is tied to his survival. But a lot of women, the job is not tied to their survival, because a lot of them have boyfriends, a lot of them have husbands, a lot of them have family So they have people there to help them out. And I went in depth in this in Stop Simping in the Workplace. My book, Stop Simping in the Workplace. And I talked about it in depth there, and I'm going to try to leave a link to that one in the stream so you can pick up that book. And again, so that's another thing that's leading to the decline of a lot of American business. And again, a lot of women look to go to work for getting their emotional needs met, whereas men go to work to get their economic needs met. So that's also having a problem with America's economy, because when you have people who go to work to get their emotional needs met, they aren't thinking about developing their craft and then just dealing with those struggles out here as related to a job. Because when you're on a job or you're on a project out here, what happens is you just have to, push through it, because there are going to be rough times when you're on a job out here. And I remember on several books, I remember when I was writing The Man Crisis, there were a couple of chapters where I got a little stuck here or there. And at one point, I wanted to just stop doing the book altogether. But I realized that if I wanted to finish this book, I had to just um, bear with it and continue to persevere. And a lot of times, whenever a woman runs into an obstacle, they don't persevere. What they do is they wind up giving up and then moving on. Whereas a man understands that, look, if I don't finish this, it's not going to, I'm not going to be able to accomplish anything, and I'm not going to be able to move myself forward. And that was one of the things I was doing with The Man Crisis. Is I wanted to do this book because I wanted to explain why so many men are suffering out here and why so many men are struggling out here. And I had to buckle down in order to publish this book. And after I went through all of that hardship last year when I was writing the book, the end result was I got critical praise from Sandman, and he rarely ever gives positive reviews to anything, but he gave The Man Crisis positive reviews. And the book is this close to 300 sales, but the only way you're going to get anything out here is if you persevere. And that's something that a lot of females, when they enter the job market, they don't do. They run into the first obstacle, and then they just fall apart and leave the job, and they never learn anything. The only way you're going to learn, again, is if you go out here and persevere. And guys, that's what they do when they're in the job market. I mean, I remember went back in 2007 when I was writing the screenplay All About Marilyn. I had a time period where my laptop that I had at the time died, and I didn't even have any money for an entire year. And I had to revise the script with loose leaf paper. So I had a draft that I had printed before the computer had died, and I had to do revisions on loose leaf paper. That's the type of perseverance guys have out here when they're working on different skills. And at the time, I was trying to learn how to do screenwriting, and that's something that I had to do as I was out here trying to start my life all over again after losing the AmeriCorps job and then losing another job that I thought was going to go somewhere. I was still out here trying to write things like All About Marilyn. And again, when you run into obstacles, you have to keep working and pushing for what you want to do. And a lot of women out here, the minute they run into one obstacle, they run back to their parents, they run back to their boyfriend. And again, this has a long-term damaging impact on the overall American economy, because when people quit and give up in the job market, what happens is you don't really grow, you don't develop any skills, and nobody can move anything forward because either this person is stuck in one place or the company is losing momentum. Because when a person quits a job, guess what? The company has to stop everything that it does and then begin a search to look for another worker. Then they have to start slowing everybody down to get the other worker up to speed. And they have to do this over the course of 90 to 180 days. And then what happens is the whole thing is you start to lose momentum as a business because you've got to slow your business down to let this new employee get up to speed. And if this employee winds up quitting, you have to start that whole process over again. And then what happens is you wind up losing productivity. Now, this is something else, another statistic that the government says is out here. Oh, productivity is up. But I look at a lot of these companies, the productivity really is stagnant. And the reason why it's stagnant is because you have a lot of part-time jobs, you have a lot of low-wage jobs, you have a lot of turnover. And when you have part-time jobs, low-wage jobs, and turnover, people don't have incentive to go out here and be motivated to push themselves, persevere, or take things to another level. Luciano, I don't think productivity is dying because of hedonism. It's dying because people just don't have that motivation to try harder because there's no payoff for them. And that's one of the things that's hurting a lot of companies these days is that people have no incentive to do anything because they don't see anything coming of their hard work. I mean, like in Hollywood, you have all these creative people, but the executives, they're so scared out here of trying anything new. So they don't have any incentive to be productive because nobody wants to try anything new. And your productivity also is dying because you have people who don't stay long enough to learn anything. Because in order for a person to be productive, they have to see progress, but you have to stay somewhere long enough in order to see progress. And if you're in a job for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, that's not enough time to really see progress. Again, I worked in AmeriCorps, and it's just like my boss said, a year isn't enough time to really even see any sort of progress or any sort of growth. A person has to be there at least 3 to 5 years to see any sort of growth and to see any sort of change. It's just like going to the gym. If you go to the gym for 3 to 6 months, you're not even really going to start seeing anything. It's not until maybe the 9th month, or the year mark that you start to see things. Luciano asks a good question. What made gender start mattering over race in the social justice world? Well, when it came down to it, you had a large group of women in the workforce. You had a large group of women at the college level. And that's why they started making gender over race for the social justice warriors, because there were more women in college and more women in the job market. And that's why it's always about the gender, because white women want to put that over race because they want to make it all about white women. Yeah, you make a good point there, Max Panther. Yeah, the women are always about social. And again, they're not about developing skills, whereas guys, they want to learn different skills and different aspects of the company. And they want to learn those things because they want to move. A lot of women, again, they know that there's another man out there who can get to take care of them. They know that there are simps all around. So the job is not their incentive to see any sort of growth. So they're sitting there, they're not there and getting anything out of it. And again, women are social. This all about their social needs. It's not about economic needs. For men, it's about economic needs and it's about their survival. So when they get on a job, they are out there looking for ways to move themselves ahead so that they can make more money, so they can start building. So women primarily, they go to jobs to be social, and they look for things like status and positions, but they're not looking to develop skills. So a lot of times they will again get the degrees and the education, but at the end of the day, what happens is they don't really stay in the job for a long enough time to develop enough skills. And again, I have had family members tell me this, that there will be women on the job and their priorities are not focused on expanding, developing, innovating. It's just a social environment. And again, that is leading to part of America's decline, because if your people are focused on doing what is popular, they're not focused on doing what is expedient and in the best needs of the company. Because when you're in a company, you have to focus on what is on the best interest of the company and growing the company. And sometimes doing things that are going to make you popular with people may not get you the customers in the future, because some of the things they want to do is make people happy at the job. But what the job is, jobs are not about happy. They're not about getting your emotional needs met. They are about getting your economic needs met. And that's why a lot of these companies are stalling in all over. They're just struggling because you have companies where people are talking about they want to be happy, but work was never designed for you to be happy. Again, I talked about this in Stop Simping in the Workplace, and I wanted people to understand what the workplace is all about. The workplace is all about um, people going to make a living and being able to take care of themselves. And that's something that's not happening these days because people are focused on getting their emotional needs met from an institution designed to meet your economic needs and be able to make yourself a way to make a living. But this is something people are not able to do these days because our economy, again, just isn't stable enough to sustain anyone. And the reason why, again, it's not because um, nothing is really stable. But most Americans, they listen to the rhetoric talking about, oh, America's economy has 3.1% unemployment. But again, who is working and how much money are they making? And again, the indicators that tell you if people are doing well is if people are picking up these big ticket items like homes, like cars, and looking to build things like families. Because if you have people and they're economically stable, what they're going to do is go out here and they're going to be you're going to see men and women getting married. You're going to see men and women having children. You're going to see men and women buying these homes, and you're going to see people going out here and investing in things as related to their children, like college funds, and going out here and spending money at private schools like Catholic schools, which have been closing all over the country. And a lot of the private schools have been closing all over the country. But you have everybody talking about how well the economy is doing, but we're not expanding in the ways that an economy is supposed to expand. So I'm looking at the economy, and again, it's just not expanding the way it's supposed to expand. And I was reading those CBS reports, and again, it talked about the low wage jobs. And then I read another one talking about income inequality. And again, you can clearly see the income inequality that's at the worst level in 50 years. I'm going to leave a link to that article. And these indicators are, I can't leave a link to it, so oh well. But it was on CBS News. But these indicators are pointing in the wrong direction when you look at the big picture of America. They're not moving up in the right indicators. And again, when you have no stability in your job market, it trickles into your people not having children. And when your people aren't having children, you have declining birth rates. And again, that hurts the overall American economy in the future, because if our Social Security system is on the brink, then it's going to collapse because we have no taxpayers paying into it. And we have empowered the wrong people because we bought into the narrative of feminism, and now we have a majority of women in the workforce. But again, they don't stay long enough anywhere to learn anything. They don't stay long enough to innovate anything. And those who have had power have done things like the whole thing as related to the entertainment industry. And it's get woke, go broke, which is what we're seeing right now with Hollywood. And Spec Streaming made a good point of that at the CUNY hiring pool back in 2007. And a lot of times when you have women doing interviews, they are very indifferent to men in the workforce. They are very cold to men in the workforce. And unless they can feel something, they don't really want to look at your resume or your qualifications. They don't really care about any men on the job or even the goals of the job. It's just about how they are feeling. And it really hurts the job market because it's keeping a lot of men out of the workforce. And I talk about that in the man crisis because a lot of men, they just decide to stop looking for work because they run into all of these women at these interviews. They are cold to them, indifferent to them, and they don't even try to ask you any questions. And I ran into that several times where they just literally didn't try to ask me any questions or even look at my resume. They just blew me off. And that's because they want a social environment where they can be comfortable socially and they're not thinking about the long-term needs of the business. So that's a big problem with a lot of these female-based businesses or businesses filled with females. They're not thinking long-term about business overall. It's a social environment, and it destroys a lot of businesses because people are thinking mostly about their feelings and not thinking about setting aside your feelings, because men have to set aside our feelings in order to go out here and accomplish something greater. And we have to put our feelings aside because we understand there's something more important for us to accomplish. But when you have people who are in their feelings, all they're thinking about is how they feel, and they're not understanding that your feelings shouldn't be important at all when it comes down to your business. And this is a big problem for a lot of companies, and that's why a lot of talented men and women can't get in the door, and that's really stopping a lot of companies from really growing. And that's why a lot of things like Hollywood are stagnating, and even some of these companies like comic book companies are starting to decline because they have women working at the top and they're not really letting any new talent in, and they're not trying to support any of the other talent because everything is about people agreeing with them and their ideas and not thinking about what is in the best interest of the company. Like at Marvel Comics, which is run by Sana Amanat, it's all about what she wants, but not about what the customer wants or providing a quality product. And that's why the sales have started to decline over at Marvel, and they never really bounce back. Again, there's all these indicators are declining, but whenever you try to bring it up, nobody wants to hear it. And again, whenever you try to bring it up, they just want to say that it doesn't happen, there's no discrimination, but people can clearly see it, and they can clearly see the damage that's being done. Like men not going to college anymore because they say that, look, there's nothing here outside of STEM, and most people are going into trades, and they're going into trades because there's no money in college anymore. I mean, people made promises to people, and that's a good point, Luciano. How do we re-empower men? A lot of the investment in men has to be done outside of the college system, because the college system, all it does is produce consumers. We need to focus on developing producer-based things in America's economy, because we're not producing innovators, we're not producing creators, and they can't really get a foothold anywhere because our society is consumer-based, and that's why nothing is growing. We need to have a producer focus, and that's where men come in. And because men primarily are producers, we are builders, we are creators, but America's economy has been service-based and consumer-based. But we need to start investing in our men if we hope to turn our economy around. If we want to turn your economy around, you have to invest in your men. And I talked about that. And you have to invest in your men if you hope to build anything substantive, because it's your men who go out here and create new ideas. It's your men who go out here and create new concepts. It's your men who go out here and innovate. So you have to focus on building up your men. And when you build up your men, they make things stable. And it's that stability that allows people to go out here and be able to start focusing on goals. And when you have stability, people start thinking, okay, I got this job, and if I can keep this job for 1 year, then I have enough saving. I can start saving for a deposit for an apartment. And then after I get the savings for that apartment, I can then start saving for a car. And then if I can start to get my savings up again, I can start saving for a house. And again, this is how people built their lives back in the 50s and the 60s. after they did a stint in the military. Sometimes they would go get a job at one of these plants or something like that, or a company, and they would start working on the building blocks of their lives. And that's what allowed them to have the stability to start thinking about marriage, start thinking about a family, and start thinking about retirement. But these days, it's hard for people to really think about doing those things because everything in America is just so unstable, and things are just unstable because Americans, one, are greedy. Like a lot of these corporate guys, they sent our manufacturing overseas. And if your manufacturing is overseas, they have a middle class. Because if you look at China, they have a middle class. I mean, they have a brand new Ford Taurus in their market, but we're saying we can't sell cars here in America, but they have a brand new Ford Taurus. They have Buicks. They have all this stuff. And again, that's because we imported our middle class and we crippled our economy by believing we could bring service and have that be the foundation for America's economy. When in actuality, you need manufacturing because you need to go out here and build your own things. You need to be able to have tangible product in order to sell to the customer, and you need that tangible product to be able to be sold in other countries. Because if you have tangible products, what happens is you have tangible products that can be sold, manufactured, and you can bring money into your country and they bring money out of other countries. And that's something that Americans just aren't doing right now, because when you make a fast food burger or you make something that's stocked on a retail shelf, it really does not allow you to build wealth or create tangible assets. So it's a big problem these days. And Americans, they're just not really thinking about the overall long-term future of the country. They just listen to rhetoric again that tells them that, oh, America's doing great. We have 3% unemployment. But again, what type of jobs are those Americans employed in? I mean, a lot of these jobs, because I hear from people all over the country, like Max Panther, and they tell me about these jobs out here, and they really, you can have them for 6 months. You have them for you. Thank you, C-Man, for the donation, and thank you to the brother who sent me a donation on Cash App. I really appreciate it. If you guys want to donate to the Super Chat or the Patreon or the PayPal, well, not the PayPal, the Cash App, I really would appreciate it. I'll leave the link to the Cash App again. Well, Trex, the kind of jobs I think men should pursue is auto mechanics, anything in the skilled trades, anything in the skilled trades. I think, yeah, auto mechanics, construction, even the culinary arts, being a chef, anything that you work with your hands, because when you get blue collar trades, what happens is you get skills that nobody can take away from you. And once you get those skills with your hands, nobody can take them away from you, and you can just start your own business with those skills. So if you get that type of work, you always have work because you have your hands as your skills and you have knowledge as your skills. And so you can just build any type of thing where you want. So that's the best type of skills you can have, because nobody can take them from you. And you can also use it to make side hustles and side jobs. And you can also use it to invent things as well, because I see a lot of guys on YouTube who do our auto mechanics and stuff. They're out here tuning up cars. They're building up new different parts, to building up different exhausts. And with those skills, you can develop them and take them to another level. IT, you can do IT, but you have to learn coding and stuff. Close, Sean. I have PC repair. I'm an IT technician. I can take computers apart, but that can only take you but so far, because what happened is they've changed the technology. But I have A+ certification in IT. But you can get that, and if you're still doing building of computers and stuff, yeah, you can take construction, welding. Welding is very good. Plumbing is very good. The push for the $15 minimum wage, I always thought that was a mistake, G. Woodward. I always thought that was a disaster. because what that did was it started inflation in America's economy. And a lot of the businesses, they wanted to push the $15 an hour on. What happened was a lot of these companies, they had razor thin profit margins. So when they had two workers, they wound up cutting to one. And when they had three workers, they started cutting to two. And fast food, a lot of the fast food places that they raised this minimum wage on, they wound up doing things like bringing in automated kiosks, because I see them at the Burger King I go to and the McDonald's I go to. And again, that took money out of people's pockets, because they used to be they would have two or three cashiers, but now they're cutting down on people because of them. And it's a mistake, because you don't need to raise the minimum wage. What you need to do is help people develop skills that allow them to move out of those jobs, because the big problem in America is that we're not creating enough middle class jobs. And because we're not creating enough middle class jobs, this is the big problem, because nobody is able to grow. So we have all these people out here who like young people who can't get jobs and keep them, because we're not creating middle class jobs for the next generation to move into. And again, that's all indicating stagnation. So that's a big problem. And we're sitting here trying to raise a minimum wage on a minimum wage job when we need to be creating, new jobs, and we need to be creating new innovations. But it's hard to create new innovations because we have no men in the job market, and a lot of them have been discouraged because they go into interviews, they run into women, the women are cold to them, women are nasty to them, and people are frustrated, so they just give up and stop searching altogether because they get frustrated. Because they see that they go on interviews for like I went on interviews for 2 or 3 years. That's really frustrating. And then your money is running low, your money's running out, and guys just give up and they just start looking to do things. Community college is a good way to save money. I mean, it's a good way to save money. You can get college credits, and if you focus, you can save a bunch of money on a degree. But as I see it, the best deal is skilled trades like auto mechanics, like welding, plumbing. Those jobs have a shortage of people because the older people are retiring and they need new people, and we need new guys out here. So really, the skilled trades can't be taken from you, because once you get your skills, you can then have those skills for life, and then you can build on those skills. And once you have those skills, again, you can start your own business with those skills. Whereas with a degree, it's only so much you can do with a college degree. And when you have a college degree, all you can do is, it shows that you passed all the classes for a subject, but it does not really show you growing and helps you develop any sort of skills, because the college degree, it looks good on paper, but it really doesn't help anything overall. And a lot of guys are frustrated because they get these degrees, and then they continue to run into these guys, these men and women in HR who want to move the goalpost, and it's frustrating. And you come in, you have the degree, like you have the experience. Like I came in for the CUNY office assistant job. I had the qualifications, I had the experience, and the woman in HR, when I did the first interview, blew me off because she said, "Oh, I did volunteer work and it wasn't a paying job." And the same thing happened to me when I did a phone interview with a woman for a security guard job. She was like, "Oh, you didn't have any job that collected a paycheck." And again, she didn't see that I was working for myself for several years selling books on paperback and Kindle. She just blew off all my experience, and all of my work rates, just blew it all off because I didn't have the experience she wanted to have. Again, it was about her feelings, not about trying to find somebody who was good with everything. JKM87, should men pursue trades that require little to no interaction with women? I think they should, because when a man is on a job with other men, he can sharpen his skills and develop himself. And it also protects him from sexual harassment in this era of Me Too. So pursuing a trade where there's not that much female interaction is good for your career, because then you don't have to worry about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and walking on eggshells, like Trek said. You don't have to worry about anything like that. Devin, yeah, medical field is good, but the best thing to do is when you're on a job, because you want to focus on what your folk want to do on a job. That's what you really want to focus on when you're on a job, is you want to focus on developing your skills, developing your craft, meeting the goals of the work you want to do. Yeah, I've heard of minority stress, and yeah, it's because guys are anxious and they're afraid of getting fired. I've had minority stress on several of my jobs, because you're afraid that you may not have a job today or tomorrow, and you're afraid that your first day on a job may be your last. So a lot of black men, we deal with that stress every day. We know that the job market isn't stable for us, so we have to try to save as much money as we can and try to stay as long as we can. We can't come in thinking we're going to stay here permanently. We have to focus on trying to build what we can in the time that we have. So a lot of guys, we live with that for years. Max Panther, I don't find it strange. It's just that that's the way these boys are exposed to. A lot of the young brothers are exposed to rappers and NBA players, so they're not exposed to men in the community who have jobs and things like welding, jobs like auto mechanics. Because if your boys are exposed to men in the community, then they have somebody to aspire to be like. Like, I was watching several YouTube channels of guys who work on cars, and their fathers are out there and they're working on cars. So that makes them want to work on cars. So if you have men in the community, your boys don't want to be rappers and ball players. They want to be auto mechanics. They want to be welders. They want to be bakers. They want to be chefs. They want to be in these different skill trades. And they get these skills that they can use their hands. And if they can build a strong enough reputation, they can then name their price for whatever they want, like barbers and stuff. If you have men in the community, then boys aspire to want to be something other than a rapper and a ball player. Now, I was exposed to books at an early age, and that was one of the things that wanted me make me want to be a writer. I mean, I remember when my brother brought me some Richard Scarry books, and that was the start of me wanting to be a writer. And he also had comic books, and those are the things that made me aspire to be a writer. And ever since I was 9 years old, and these days I've in that time. So it's what you expose your kids to. And a lot of kids who grow up in single mother households, they get exposed to rappers and ball players. And because they see these men on screen, that's what they aspire to. But if you put people in front of your son who are professionals, they're going to start to see other skills and then want to aspire to be like those men. That's why male figures are very important in a boy's life, and male figures are important to the building of a boy into growing into a healthy young man. So you really need to have my three favorite comics at the moment. I really am enjoying Josh Howard's T-Bird and Throttle. I'm enjoying Chris Brown's Omega Black, and I am really enjoying the Count Crowley Midnight Monster Hunter from Dark Horse Comics. Those are my three favorite comics at the moment, and an honorable mention to Elvira, Mistress of the Dark from Dynamite. All of those books are very good, and those are books I can recommend you pick up. So, yeah, that's a good point, Mr. 08. Yeah, most of these black rappers and athletes, they are emasculated, and they're not really good role models because they don't present you with a positive example of masculinity. They don't really present you a strong example of masculinity. And a lot of these guys, they are bought and paid for by Hollywood to present you these effeminized images of masculinity. But that's another live stream. And Trex, that's a good question. I don't think it's right for women to ridicule men for making less, but because they are hindered by human resources departments, they are hindered by the job market. So a lot of guys are making less because they just can't get access to the job market. I know this from experience, and I also know it from talking to other men out here online. A lot of guys out here, they want to make that type of money, but they just can't get in the door. We desperate JKM 87. I really have positive views on truck drivers. If it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't get the food to supermarkets. We wouldn't get the merchandise to the stores. I don't think that they're replaceable. You have these guys in tech thinking that they can replace them, but they can't be replaced. There's nothing like having a human at the wheel of a truck. They know things instinctively that the computer cannot figure out. So this is something we really need. And when you have a guy at the wheel, he can instinctively respond to different hazards, and a computer can't respond to them. So we really need to appreciate our truck drivers again, because these are blue collar men who get the food to people's tables, they get the clothes to the stores, and this is something that I believe it would be a disaster to try to replace, because if you got a guy in a 50-ton semi, he can stop things like on slick roads or water or rain slick roads or icy roads, and a computer cannot detect between the two. And all it's going to do is lead to more accidents transpiring on the highways and more deaths, because we see with the auto driving car how it just keeps malfunctioning. And I can't imagine what type of horror would happen if one of these trucks auto drove and then just drove the wrong way. It's a disaster waiting to happen. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. And Lady Justice, I think if they did put automation to replace human workers, what's going to happen is these companies are going to go bankrupt, because you need employees that you pay in order to buy product. And if there are no employees to pay, these companies go bankrupt. So you need people to do things like these jobs, and to use these robots and computers. It's going to be a disaster sooner rather than later. And they're not seeing how somebody like a terrorist could hack into these things and turn them into weapons. And they're not seeing the big picture, because a lot of times when you're dealing with these educated people, they're in a bubble and all they're thinking about is making their project work. They're not thinking about how it works in the real world. Call center jobs. I had another guy on Facebook. He was telling me that it was a nightmare, that it was a place filled with hood rats and these simps. And it's another job where people really don't last that long. But they're not looking at the big picture as related to these trucks being hacked into by a terrorist group and then used as a weapon. But self-driving cars, I just see them as a dangerous thing. I just see them in the wrong hands being dangerous. And again, that would lead to a further decline of America, because if you don't have working people, again, who's going to buy the product? And that's the question that none of these people who are in these bubbles, these echo chambers, are really thinking about. They are not really thinking about who is going to buy the products. If you automate and fire all the people, then there are no consumers. And they're not understanding that their economy is consumer based. And if you have a consumer based economy, then who is going to do the consumption? So that's something they're not really thinking about overall. And a lot of the big problems with America and its decline is that nobody is thinking about the big picture about America. Everybody's thinking individually, but they're not thinking about how things are connecting to each other. And that's a big problem with America, that everything works together. I mean, again, if your people are not working on stable jobs, they cannot build things like families. And if your woman is working at the job as the primary breadwinner, then she has no time to have children, and she has no time to raise children. So your population isn't going to grow. And if your population doesn't grow, your economy doesn't grow. And you're putting in the seeds for your decline, but you just don't see it, because all you're thinking about are the short-term successes, but not thinking about trying to maintain any sort of growth. And that's one of the big problems with Americans today and people in Western countries like those in Europe, where I saw the thing with Italy and I also saw it with Japan. Everything is about um, this short term, but they're not thinking about the long term. And they're thinking about empowering the woman, but not thinking about building up the man. And again, the solution to reversing a lot of these problems is rebuilding the American man and making the American man be an asset to society, because we're not valuing our men, we're not building our men. And that's why we're having a population crisis and an economic crisis that's possibly about to come, because we're not focusing on building and developing our men to create and innovate in the future. So we need to focus on building up our men in order to stop this decline. But most people are so caught up in empowering women and pushing agendas that they're not thinking about the big picture of America. So that's one of the big problems with this whole America in decline. And again, I believe America is in a state of decline. And it's something that people aren't talking about because so many people are caught up in the rhetoric of a so-called great economy. But I don't see how great this economy is in comparison to the economy of the 1990s and the early 2000s, where the economy, when it was strong, you had working class people buying cars, buying homes, and looking to build a family. The American economy is not doing any of those things. And if we don't look at those indicators and see where they're going, we won't see the country going in the right direction. Because if you look at those indicators, they're telling us our country isn't going up, it's going down. I'm going to get ready to wrap up tonight's stream. Cash out everybody who donated to the super chat again. And I'd love for everybody to pick up The Man Crisis on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle formats. And I'd love for you guys to pick up John Haynes' Dark Succubus in paperback and Kindle formats, Isis, All That Glitters in paperback and Kindle formats, and Esteemed Goddess of and The Temptation of John Haynes. All of these books are great gifts for anybody in your family this holiday season. And I'd love to see you guys pick up some of my books on Amazon, because I really want to get the holiday sales up. And I also would love to see you guys try out, especially a lot of my fiction. I'm glad everybody enjoyed the stream, and I hope you guys will pick up some of my books after the show. Thank you all for coming to the stream, and I hope to have another stream next week.